So tonight, I am delighted to welcome our features presenter, Dr. Dustin Partridge, the Director of Conservation and Science at New York City Bird Alliance, formerly New York City Audubon, a nonprofit that protects birds and their habitats in New York City. As the organization's lead scientist and a pioneering scientist in urban conservation research in North America, Dr. Partridge oversees all conservation efforts in three major focus areas. One, making the city's buildings safer for migratory birds. Two, protecting the city's robust water bird colonies. And three, improving and promoting habitat and green infrastructure. Dr. Partridge is also a founder of the New York City Green Roof Research Alliance and an adjunct professor at Columbia University. Like his dissertation work, which examined the ecology of green roofs and their role in wildlife conservation, his approach to conservation is based on using science to drive solutions that benefit both wildlife and people. His published research has reshaped the national conversation on the role of cities in conservation and led to significant policy changes in New York City, including the passing of a series of laws requiring all new construction and major renovations to use bird-safe materials on facades to prevent bird collisions, which are estimated to kill 1 billion birds across North America annually. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Dustin Partridge, who I am sure will delight and inform us with his presentation, How to Save a Billion Birds, Stop Window Collisions. Dustin, please share your screen and begin when you are ready.
Oh, thank you, Scott. Thank you all for having me. As I pull this up, I just want to say a particular thanks to Scott. I had the pleasure of meeting Scott at the Audubon Leadership Conference up in Montreal, and I was immediately taken with his passion for conservation and making change. And I was really excited when he reached out to ask me to join you all tonight. So, Scott, could you give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen? Everything's okay?
Thumbs
All
up.
right. Great. So I'm going to talk about today. We're going to focus on just on bird collisions and how to stop them, really, because this is one of the biggest challenges that birds are facing right now. We'll really get into that. But of course, I'll answer some questions and get into kind of how we do conservation in New York City, because that's a little bit of a often surprise to people. Although I hear that from Scott that many of you are either from New York or visit New York often. And I must say that I have we also share a lot of birds, but I have a particular soft spot for Florida because I spent a little bit of time working in the Florida Keys studying dolphins. And I absolutely loved running up to the Everglades on weekends to explore. So I love the area that you're all living in and exploring every day. So I work for New York City Bird Alliance. So we are a nonprofit organization that works to protect birds and biodiversity across the 5 boroughs of New York City. And we're doing this for all New Yorkers. You can see some photos of the work that we do here. We are a chapter of National Audubon. Our name was New York City Audubon up to about a year and a half ago. We changed it, but we are an independent chapter with our own board, our own finances. And what makes us kind of special is we're a pretty large staff chapter. We have about 15 or 16 full-time staff, and then during the field season where we're doing research, we hire over a dozen more field scientists. And the work that we do is really connecting these three areas of science, engagement, and advocacy. So I'm the director of conservation and science, which means I have the really fun job of overseeing all of our science work that we're doing across the city. We have a team of scientists that are going out and collecting data on what threats are present to birds or how our actions can improve bird habitat in New York City. We use that data, then we connect it with our really engaged audience. We connect with over 10,000 people a year at events. This is a photo from the Christmas bird count. And you can I'm sure everybody here has the same excitement, but when you go out and you see these birds, it's really stunning. And New York City has incredible birding. We connect that science data with our engaged audience, and then they become advocates, and we advocate for change. And it's through this pathway that we use data to connect with our engaged audience and we advocate for change that we've managed to have New York City have some of the most comprehensive bird safe building legislation in the nation, as well as green roof legislation. And it's this pathway from science, engagement, advocacy that really drives our work. But I'm the director of conservation and science, which means that we're going to mostly be focusing on science today, but we'll touch on some of these other topics. And Science in New York City is really exciting. We have a lot of areas to focus on. But what happens when we go to connect that science to people in New York City? People are often surprised, right? You don't immediately think of conservation in New York City. So oftentimes we have to bridge that gap because people in New York City, some big corporations or big businesses, may not really realize why birds are so special. So a lot of times as an organization, we talk and we say what is good for birds is good for people. And this is something that is absolutely true. So y'all probably know this and internalize it, but it's really good for meeting sustainability goals and ecosystem services. Climate change that is ravaging so many different areas. We can better fight climate change if we have more birds. They're flying out and promoting forests and grasslands and sequestering carbon. Really good for ecotourism. The bird people will travel far for a good bird or to go birding for the first time. And the recent Fish and Wildlife shows that a majority or a large percentage of people in the US are birders in some form or another. We're not alone out there. There's a lot of us out there. People are willing to put a lot of money towards birding, so it's important to protect birds. It's also good for business development. What we're seeing in New York City, and you'll see some examples of this today, is that organizations are focusing on protecting birds as a way to attract higher quality employees or to pull in people that want to go to an area or even market their own business. And that's really nice to see of kind of companies working in conservation to help themselves, but also to help biodiversity. And then we've all felt this last part, but what's good for birds is good for people because these birds are really close to human health. When there's published data that shows that when you go out into a habitat that has more bird singing, you feel better. If you have access to a green space, you're going to do better and being able to live longer, reduce the stress. We've all had that moment where we walk outside after having a little bit of a stressful day, and we hear those birds singing, and we immediately feel better. So it's good for birds, it's good for people. And if you didn't, I mean, even if you did grow up in New York City, you may not realize that New York City is a biodiversity hotspot. So we have over 350 bird species that are in New York City every year. And it's because of a number of reasons. I mean, the first one is that if you look at this habitat here, this is Manhattan as it was before European arrival. And you can see that there are people here. You can see smokestacks coming up, but what you also see is this diversity of habitats. So you have these incredible wetlands, you have upland habitats, you have deep forests, you have tons of shoreline, and it's all of these resources that promoted incredible biodiversity here. It's also part of the reason why New York City formed here, because New York City people were able to use the resources that were here. And this is kind of what New York City looks like now. It looks very different. We've changed the island itself has grown with a lot of fill. Most of the island has been developed, but in these patches of green space, there's still incredible biodiversity. And in those patches of green space, we can do a lot of work to protect and promote that biodiversity and connect people to biodiversity. And it's, as you can see here, though, most of this land is now concrete and glass, which we'll come to in a little bit. But part of the reason why New York City is so important for birds is because it's right along the Atlantic Flyway, just as you are. And this is a shot from this fall when we had over a billion birds flying at one night on October 8th. These birds that are passing right through New York City are most of them are heading down to Florida, and they're heading down to Florida and points beyond. There's a lot of movement and a lot of connection. And these birds that move through are the birds that we're primarily thinking about conserving when we're thinking about bird safe glass and reducing collisions with glass. And I want to point out too that New York City and Florida share a lot of birds. So this is a photo from Cedar Key, I guess on the other side of where you're located. But if you're ever out and you see a shorebird or any water bird with orange bands, that's a New York bird. That's a New Yorker. So this bird is a bird that was born in New York City, hatched in New York City, and was banded by our crew. Orange and on black is a New York band. So if you see that came from somewhere in New York, if you're out there, and there are plenty of birds that hatch in New York, live in New York, or breed in New York, and then go down to Florida for the winter. There are a couple of really key sites where they overwinter. So we share a lot. This is just the water birds. A lot of our passerines, the songbirds, are moving through as well. And it's that migratory movement. It's this connection to birds is why birds are so important. But I don't have to tell this group, but we've lost a lot of birds. So since 1970, we've lost 2.9 billion birds. birds are in rapid decline, and that's because of a number of different reasons. It's habitat loss. We're continuing to lose habitat at a very rapid rate through development, but also through climate change. And climate change is a major threat. It's going to be continuing to be one of the biggest threats that we have to face in conservation to protect these birds. It's also through pesticides and development. But part of this loss is due to something that's actually very solvable, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So it's this. It's not the lawns or the suburban development or the parking lot. The big threat that birds are facing are window collisions. And that experience that you just had there, trying to figure out what that glass was or what that figure was, that's the experience that that American robin had before it collided with that glass. This is a major driver of bird deaths, and I promise not to show too many dead birds this presentation because I know that can be hard to see. I'll have a few. The next slide is particularly challenging to look at, so just be warned. But it's a major threat that birds face. But what I'm hoping that you take away tonight is that this is something that is easily solvable. We can prevent this. All those big challenges that we're facing, they might seem hard to face, but this is one that is within our reach to actually solve. So this next slide is a little challenging to see, but over 1 billion birds die in building collisions in the US every year. Our data shows this. Our data looking across the Northeast at collisions and how many birds actually survive demonstrate that over 1 billion birds are dying in just the US every single year. This is the result of collision monitoring in Lower Manhattan on one day. So there was one day a few years ago, it was a particularly high migration night and a low cloud ceiling. And our volunteer collision monitors, which are dedicated people that wake up and follow standardized protocol to look for dead or injured birds, they arrived in Lower Manhattan, a brightly lit, very glassy area, and they found 300 dead birds along one stretch of facade. This is just a portion of them. These are all birds that connect from Canada, Maine, upstate New York, down to Florida and the Caribbean and South America. And they're stopped in their tracks because of glass and light. But again, this is easily solvable. And I mentioned glass and light because this is very much a two-part problem. So to address this solution, we really need to talk about why birds are colliding in the first place. So light is a big part of this. About 150 years ago, we invented artificial light at night, and suddenly the night sky changed. It became brighter. This is a view from one of the large skyscrapers in Midtown Manhattan looking south. And you can just see how bright this is and how much this changed from what might have been here before European arrival and how it's a brightly lit sky. And light functions on different scales. So at the macro scale, this is from a paper from Carolyn Burt in 2023. On the macro scale, it pulls birds towards brightly lit areas. So whether that's a city or a suburban development or an industrial site or a cruise ship, light attracts birds. They are migrating. Most birds migrate at night. Most birds in North America that migrate at night. And as they're migrating at night, trying to navigate the sky with the stars and the moon and Earth's magnetic fields, bright lights override that and they change their direction. They head towards bright lights at night. At the regional scale, they then concentrate in the areas that are most brightly lit, like what you see here in this photo of Manhattan. This area in Lower Manhattan is where that mass collision happened. It's the most brightly lit area that you can see. And then on the local scale, bright lights are so disorienting to birds that they get drawn towards it and they collide with brightly lit windows. They can collide with light that's as they're flying and trying to migrate at night. And to demonstrate kind of how impactful artificial light is, I want to share one example of the work that we do. And this is with the Tribune Light. So you may or may not have heard of this event, but it's a very powerful monument that happens every year on 9/11. And it's a tribute that is a light show that runs in Lower Manhattan, and it goes on to commemorate the lives lost on 9/11, which is a major disaster for New York City. And honestly, it's a very moving event. People, every time you're there are people crying, very emotional, really feeling the loss that is still very present. But you can see it's incredibly bright. So this light is visible from up to like it shines several miles into the sky, and it's visible from dozens of miles away. And that light attracts birds. So don't worry, the work that we do on site, We are there from sunset to sunrise, making sure that this is safe. You can see me and my colleague Jessica here. And what we do all night long with a team of really dedicated volunteers that are willing to stay up all night. The only reward they get is pizza at 2 a.m. But we stay overnight, and every 20 minutes, using binoculars, we count how many birds are stuck in the beams. When we hit a critical threshold of birds stuck in the beams, we shut the lights out, and all those birds move on. They're able to get out, snap out of the transit they're in. They're attracted to the light, and they move on, continuing their migration. So partners with us, New York City Bird Alliance and Cornell Lab of Ornithology, looked at this under radar. And just to demonstrate how impactful this is, I want you to focus on this figure on the left. So this is the night in 2015, which had a big migration going through. And the lights are off at 10, 12 p.m. We have the lights off. And the ambient number of birds flying overhead in the half kilometer over the tribute light over this where the dot is right here is 500 birds. The lights turned on, and 20 minutes later, 15,700 birds were stuck in the beat, were attracted to the area. That's how many birds were pulled in over that half kilometer over Manhattan, just because of those bright lights. Light is incredibly powerful. It disrupts the night sky and it pulls birds to areas that are dangerous. Another way to look at that is here, is you can see green areas are when the lights are on, and gray areas are when the lights are off. And you can see how quickly birds respond when lights turn on and turns off. Light's very powerful. Stopping artificial light at night is a major step in reducing bird building collisions. But that's not all of it. You're a bird migrating at night, traveling long distances. Maybe you get attracted to an area that's brightly lit. You land, you're traveling thousands of miles, so you need to rest and refuel. You need to find a spot that you have the ability to kind of find forage and continue your migration. Migration is arduous. This might look like a good habitat. But what birds see as habitat, we know is not habitat. That's a reflection. This is a suburban campus. And you can see that we know this is glass because we've grown up all around it. We see these lines. We know that there's squares here. We can tell that that's not something we could walk into. Although myself, I've walked into glass plenty of times, and I bet every single person in this room has walked into glass at least once. We're not that different from birds. And when birds encounter this, the only thing that is different is that when a bird encounters this space, when it's quickly trying to fly to a habitat to avoid getting predated, it collides with glass and it's incredibly lethal. And this is what kills over 1 billion birds a year. Now, this is often thought of as an urban problem, that urban areas are the big issue here. And urban areas have a role. They concentrate risk. This is a view of Hudson Yards, an area that is in Midtown Manhattan, that is particularly lethal for birds. And you can see just why it's so dangerous, right? This is a glass building here. There's vegetation here that can be seen through the glass. There's reflections that are hard to see. It's even as a human, it's hard to see what is actually glass and what's not. For example, you probably all overlooked this line of glass right here, which is a glass railing. This is why cities are pretty bad, but it's not just a city problem. I'm also particularly fond of this photo because not only is it easy to see how it's confusing for birds, but you see these 10s here on the glass. This is the building's address. It's at adult head height and kid head height. That's not there to help people find the building. It's there to stop people from walking into the glass. That's human safe glass right there. And it's the same principle that we can extend to make glass safe for birds. But again, this isn't just a city problem. Urban areas concentrate risk because they're brightly lit and it's a lot of glass. But the data shows that collisions happen everywhere. And it's actually less than 1% of collisions happen at high rises. Those office towers, those skyscrapers, they're responsible for only a small portion of collisions that happen. Residences and low-rise industrial, like campuses or industrial parks, or houses like this, are responsible for 99% of the collisions. This is I grabbed a screenshot of a house in Florida, and you can see exactly why. There's a lot of houses all over the place, very reflective windows that also show vegetation. So this is not just a city problem, and that's also one of the barriers to large uptake, is because people tend to think of this as just a city problem, but it's largely not. These collisions are happening everywhere. And to kind of further push this message home, you may have seen this report from 2024 when we got this new number. This is the publication that we were working on that shows that it's actually over 1 billion birds die. What we did for this publication is we collected data from rehabilitation centers and looked at outcomes of birds that were brought to the rehab. And what it turns out is that the majority of birds, even under the best of conditions brought to rehab, the majority of birds, 60% of them died in care. That's with a bird that's been brought out of harm's way. It's not going to get predated upon. It's given food and water, and those birds don't survive. The likelihood, and those birds that are brought to rehab are birds that hit glass and were stunned long enough to get picked up and brought to rehab. So using this data that we collected from rehabs all across the Northeast, not just in cities, but outside, we found that these rates are pretty high. And this is how we revised our estimate of over 1 billion birds dying in the US every year. And this made global news. This was all over the place because it's a big deal. It's a shocking number to think about. But it's important to remember that each one of those birds is an individual story. Each one of those birds has traveled an incredible distance as an amazing bird to see and connects people. But these collisions are happening everywhere, not just cities. And I said this at the start, but it's pretty easy. To prevent collisions, turn off lights at night and make glass visible. We do a lot of this work in New York City, and oftentimes I'm going to talk about uh, dive into what exactly this means to turn off lights and make glass visible. But oftentimes the barrier to entry, the barrier to making something bird safe, is people are afraid of what it might look like or afraid of bird safe design. Well, here are two examples right here of beautiful bird safe glass. This is the Empire. This is a view across this is a view of a bird safe building looking across at New York City. It's a beautiful, architecturally well-designed building. And this is a dark-eyed junco, which is a wintering bird we have up here, that is sitting in front of a bird-safe glass windbreak. Bird-safe glass can look really good, and it can make a difference. And a lot of the conversations that we have in New York City are showing that it's a pretty simple and low barrier of entry to protect these birds. But what does it mean to protect birds? So you turn off lights at night, right? And this is basically reclaiming the night sky as habitat. This is a recent article that dives into how habitat, the air, the sky above us is habitat, and birds are moving through it as well as so many different species. And we've kind of forgotten about this. This is the cover of Smithsonian from a few months ago when it covered the tribute light as well as many other pieces of work that are going on out there. And to prevent bird collisions, to stop birds being attracted, we turn off lights at night. And that means turn them off or dim unnecessary lighting, just reduce how much light is out there. And for the greatest impact, focus on migration. Migration is when these birds are moving huge distances and they're being attracted to light because they're trying to navigate the night sky. So if you focus on, say, March through May and August through November to get lights out, you're going to have the biggest impact. What I pulled here, this figure is from Benjamin Van Doren's work in 2021, looking at McCormick Place, which is the convention center in Chicago that you probably have all heard of. But what this study showed is that even if you dim lights, if you have partial lighting on, it does significantly reduce collisions. This is collisions here under full lighting and collisions under variable lighting. You can see there's quite a reduction. But if you know anything about McCormick Place, you know that turning off lights is not the only solution. It's a two-part solution. Turn off lights, but then also make glass birds safe. And to make glass birds safe, use a pattern that lets glass be visible to birds. So it's very important that you address that reflection or clear glass. So remember those images of the reflective glass? It's those reflections that are quite lethal. Those reflections, to address those, you need to put a pattern on the exterior surface of glass that breaks up the pattern and lets birds know that there's something present. Clear glass is also very lethal. So if it just looks like a clear flyaway, birds are going to try to fly through it. So you need to make it visible. This is an example of a site in Lower Manhattan that we worked, that this is actually a ferry terminal. You can see the ferry pulling in here. And for a moment, focus on the image on the right. This is a gangplank that goes out to a dock, and it just had clear glass panels. It was incredibly lethal. You can actually see some birds here. These little dark spots on the gangplank here are birds. And it was a particularly hard site to work, to think about, because birds would collide with glass, and even if they were temporarily stunned, this is water beneath them, so they'd end up in the water. We brought this to the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and they immediately acted, which was amazing. And the solution here was putting on a product called Feather Friendly. It's a film that you apply to the exterior surface of glass. Because contrast really matters, you want to have something that lets birds know that something's present. We used a black dot film here, and you can see it. This is the view now that thousands of people have every day as they're walking through New York City or entering New York City for work. They can see bird safe glass, and they no longer have to see dead birds. There have been no complaints about the way this looks. And in fact, it's a much better experience because people aren't having that horrible thud sound and seeing dead birds on their way to work. This product works very well. This is feather friendly. There are a lot of other products that work. So for example, here, there are now multiple products that exist for both existing glass. If you're going to be building a new building or doing a major renovation, you can get glass that has bird safe design built into it. Alternatively, you can do retrofits like what you just saw, which is putting a some sort of a film or paracord over the glass to break up that reflection or the fly through conditions. This example on the left is a product that has a is made bird safe by having a kind of a UV pattern built into it. You probably can't even see it, but if you look really closely, I don't know if you all can see my mouse, but in the center here in this blue sky, you see a bit of a weird kind of spider web-like pattern. Most birds see UV, and when a bird sees this, it glows. They can kind of see that there's a barrier there. They don't collide with it. Now, this doesn't work for all birds because not all birds see UV, and it doesn't work under all conditions because it basically needs a lot of light to work. But there are other products that are like this that have frit or ceramic frit, which is basically like a little product that's been designed into the glass, or laser etching. There are tons of products available that all look really nice and work very well. But if you don't want to go about the expense of replacing all the glass, you can fix the glass through simple changes. This is an example here that's often used on residents. This is a Copian bird savers. It's basically paracord that's dropped every 4 inches in front of glass, and that lets birds know that there's a barrier present. Now, that 2 inches and 4 inches are something that I mentioned before, and the reason it's important to have that space very close together is because think about songbirds as they're navigating through a dense environment. They are very good about knowing where their wings are and how to navigate through a dense area. So birds will try to fly through any space that's big enough to fit them. And that's really the goal of bird safe design is to avoid letting them think that they can fit through. Because even if you have a small opening, they're going to try to squeeze through it. Finally, this is another product here. It's a similar UV product. This is a film that's relatively new to the market. It's applied to the exterior surface. And these little dots here are what we see, but birds see something more. And it works fairly well. And I'm going to talk about another organization's work for a moment, which is American Bird Conservancy. So the way that we know these products work is through tunnel testing. There's two parts to this. The first way is basically tunnel testing these products to see how they perform in a lab setting, lab being this field setup here. And they're prescribed a threat factor. So a threat factor may be a term, if you've looked into this before, that you've heard, but you didn't fully understand. But it's a really important way to decide what product to use under different scenarios. So a threat factor is basically done by the scientists at American Bird Conservancy going out and catching birds in mist nets in the forest, going back and releasing them into this tunnel. When they get released into the tunnel, don't worry, there is a mist net at the end of the tunnel. But this is what they see, the view on the left, where one pane is a clear glass panel, the other pane has a bird safe design on it. And they do this multiple times. And over the period of time, they track to see which direction the bird goes. So if the bird flies to the clear glass the majority of time, it indicates that they're seeing the bird safe glass. And it shows that that product works very well. Now, this is where threat factor comes from. Threat factor is basically a reference of how many times a bird is going to be flying towards that traditional glass and avoiding the bird safe glass. So it's a good product to work with. Generally, if you're looking at threat factor on a product, you want to be aiming for a threat factor under 30, preferably under 25. The lower the threat factor, the better it is. So the lower the threat factor, if you have a threat factor of 1, that's great. That's like a window screen. Which I should say too, window screens, if you have window screens on, great. That makes birds visible, see that there's a barrier present, and if they do happen to hit it, they bounce right off like a trampoline. Screens work great. There's a next step to this, and this is where we're going to kind of go back into the work that we do in New York City. So threat factor is a lab controlled setting, but then you can go out and test it in the real world. And this is something we've been doing for quite a while in New York City. And what we see is that when bird safe products are installed on a building, whether through the original design or at a troubled building where bird safe, where there are a lot of collisions, and then we do a change and then monitor afterward, these bird safe products work incredibly well. So up to 90 to 95% reduction in collisions is what we see. That's a lot of birds saved, especially when in New York City, you can have buildings that are killing 4 to 5,000 birds a year. So that's a big deal. And the way that we do this in New York City is we have Project Safe Flight. So this is a program you may have heard of, but this is a collision monitoring program where we have incredibly dedicated volunteers. And I mean incredibly dedicated. The work that they do is unsurpassed. But they wake up every morning during spring and fall migration, and they go out around New York City to monitor predetermined routes using a standardized scientific protocol that we then track that data, and they're looking for dead or injured birds. And through this, we've learned so much. We learn not just about efficacy of bird safe products, but we learn more about where collisions happen and why they happen and how to mitigate that change. We use this data to drive change, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, volunteer monitoring, this is growing quite a bit. This program actually started in 1997. It's one of the longest running programs in the world. And now I think it may be the largest, where we have over 150 volunteers every year, and we're monitoring 80 buildings across New York City. And this growth and these dedicated volunteers are phenomenal. And we actually just had our Project Safe Flight volunteer appreciation party a few nights ago. And the passion that these volunteers have for conservation is really incredible, and it helps that connection between science, engagement, and advocacy. But this community science monitoring, it's a powerful tool. So what you see here on the left is how we do this. We decide, me and the team, the scientists at New York City Bird Alliance, we decide which routes we're going to monitor each year for some scientific reason, or because there's a building that was raised as a potentially dangerous site, or whatever other reason we're trying to collect this data. And this is, for example, a route up on the northwest corner of Central Park. These red lines are the facades, the parts of a building that we monitor. And this is a building called Circus Central Park. This is one that had a pretty bad collision problem, primarily in its courtyard. And through this data, we were able to work with the people in the building, including some really dedicated people that wanted to make this change happen. And we were able to target where exactly collisions were happening and drive change. And you can see this coverage that the retrofit worked. It reduced collisions and saved hundreds and hundreds of birds. So this was just completed recently, and the results are astounding. And there's no longer that experience of people going home and stepping over dead birds, or going out in the courtyard and stepping over dead birds. And this also links to pretty big press coverage. I mean, you can see here a New York Times article covering it, and how this data can then be used to powerfully motivate change, demonstrate what happens when you do make a change, and also reach out to other people and drive that change. And it's this collision monitoring that's really led to New York City having that comprehensive bird safe building legislation. So by that, I mean, we were one of the first cities to have this highest level of bird safe building legislation. It's passed in 2020. And since then, so many other cities across the US have been adding this legislation. And there are some that even are better than New York City. And this legislation was possible because of the data, because of being able to demonstrate that collisions happen here. This is the scale of collisions. And when you make buildings bird safe, like this NYC Buildings Bird Friendly Design Guideline, they can still look beautiful, and they can stop killing hundreds of thousands of birds across New York City each year. This is currently being built, and one of the greatest things that I experience walking around the city is when I get to a new neighborhood or I get to an area and I did not know that there was a bird safe building being built, and I walk past and I see the frit in the glass or the UV product, and I know that that building was built because of this legislation. And people are walking past it, not noticing that it's bird safe, which is great because it doesn't matter if people notice it, it matters if the birds do. Now, I want to talk about an example in positive change to kind of give one really powerful example about how this has played out functionally at one building. This is the Javits Center. So this is the Jacob K. Javits Convention Center. It's the largest convention center in New York City. It's one of the largest in the Northeast, or possibly in the country. And it's a spot that thousands of people go through every day. This is the view of it around 2010, when it was known in the neighborhood as Darth Vader because of its appearance. It had this dark, reflective black glass, but it also was killing between 4,000 and 5,000 birds a year because of this dark, reflective glass. It's located right along the Hudson River, and it was particularly lethal. Now, our Project Safe Flight volunteers back then, starting I think in about 2007, were monitoring this building and showing that that building was killing a lot of birds. And they faced this decision whether they could, they were, because of multiple other problems, they were either going to demolish the building or renovate and design for birds with birds in mind because this was such a big issue. And they did just that. We were able to guide them to replace all of that glass, that black reflective glass, with bird-friendly glass. This is all bird-friendly glass here. There was glass that extended along this wall here that was replaced with metal barriers. And this change resulted in a 90 to 95% reduction in collisions. This bird-safe design worked, and it changed the experience of people working in the building and going to this building for a convention. If you're going here for a convention, it's one thing to be getting to the building and stepping over a dead bird. And it's another going into a building and being able to connect with wildlife or not worry about that. But what's amazing about this is not just that Javits Center decided to do bird safe glass, but they went a step further and they did this major green roof installation. So this green roof, this vegetation you see on top of this building wasn't there before. And they installed a 7-acre green roof on this building. And that had pretty immediate changes. So at this point, we've been monitoring for many years now. And we have 20% of New York City's bird species are now using Javits Center as habitat. And notice how I said use. That's because they were using the habitat. They're no longer colliding with glass. This is a regular view of the Javits Center. This is a photo that we took with the camera trap that we had deployed out on Javits Center. And you can see a phoebe doing what phoebes do, being a flycatcher in this habitat on top of this building that was once one of the biggest bird killers in New York City. And this change was so transformative to Javits that as they moved forward and put an addition, they went a step further and now they have a farm up here. This is a view of a farm. They have an apple orchard and it's all around bird safe glass. And this building literally went from being a bird killer to a bird sanctuary. Incredible changes occurred. The Javits Center employees and staff and affiliates now have the experience in going out and banding birds. The gull, this is the view of that original green roof on the extensive green roof that's 7 acres, and now hosts the largest herring gull colony remaining in New York City. And we go out and band them every year. And we actually get reports of these birds in Florida. So again, if you see an orange band, and it very well is a herring gull from the Javits Center green roof. And this engagement with wildlife is a very different experience from, again, stepping over dead birds or trying to avoid glass because you don't want to see a bird collide. It's a very different place to work now. What I'm particularly fond of is bird safe glass is front and center. This is the view from bird safe glass. This is the new Javits Center, the expansion here. And you can see just how remarkable it looks. It's beautiful. You can see the green roof. You can see the rest of the city. Your view is not interrupted. The product that's used here is a frit. That's a little ceramic powder that's built in circles into the glass, and it works very well. It's alleviated the collision problem, and it continues to do so. And going back to what I mentioned at the beginning, that bird safe design is good for business, this is pretty clear when you think about what just happened with McCormick Place. Now, McCormick Place is the Chicago building that I talked about earlier. It's also a convention center. It's a direct competitor with Javits. And you all probably heard about that night back in 2023 where 1,000 birds died immediately colliding with McCormick Place. So if you are considering if you're considering going to a convention or holding a convention somewhere, you can choose to go to the convention at the place that has getting news coverage about how an 8-acre green roof atop the Javits Center is boosting NYC's biodiversity, or you can go to the one that has this headline: nearly 1,000 migrating birds killed after crashing into McCormick Place. It's a pretty clear answer that you're going to go to the one that has habitat and bird safe glass. It's part of the reason that McCormick Place has since updated their glass to retrofit with the product feather friendly, and it's working incredibly well. That retrofit, from reports from colleagues out there, show that it's about 90 to 95% effective, working very well. These changes do make a difference. So if you're motivated to make change locally, there are a few really important things that you can do to make this change happen. This is an example of feather friendly actually being installed on the home. It comes in as a sheet, presses onto the window, you pull it off, and you're left with these tiny little stickers on the glass. But how do you do this? I'm going to talk through some suggestions about how you actually can do this. And it really starts with 2 ways. Documenting collisions and then engaging people in this, because it's one of the biggest problems facing birds right now, but it's largely not known about because people don't see it or they don't think it's that big of an issue. So by documenting collisions, you can address that. And then I'm going to give you some tools about addressing misconceptions and having that conversation with people to drive change locally. So this is a tool I'd highly recommend you check out. This is dbird.org. This is a website that New York City Bird Alliance created to basically track incidental observations. So if somebody's out walking around and they find a dead bird, rather than just throwing it out or calling the DEC where it will not be reported, you can go to this website and in under 2 minutes report your dead bird. This is really powerful, and the more people know about it, the more reports we get because people will then learn about the dead birds. You can start seeing clearly that things start emerging, patterns that emerge. So you can see that there are a few collisions that were reported down in Florida, a lot around New York City, partially because we have a lot of collisions, but also because people know about D-Bird. This is a website you can go to on your phone, on your computer, and you enter in the bird species. You don't have to know it or not. You enter in whether it was dead or injured, where you found it, and what time. You don't have to sign up for anything. You click enter, and that data is stored permanently. You can also go to, if you're on the computer, you go to the Explore tab, and you can see where collisions have been reported over time. It's a very powerful tool and really useful data that's being used in numerous ways. And as an organization, you can create this and create your own subset of data where you can get access to all of the reports of where birds are being found. And you can download that data. There's a whole user interface that was designed for organizations like Everglades Audubon um, to be diving in and collecting data. So that's the first step. Highly recommend checking out. And if you've ever seen a bird get injured or collide with glass, go ahead and report it here. The data helps. Well, let's start talking about misconceptions. Why don't people know about this? It's a big issue, but why don't people understand what's going on? And it's often pretty simple. People say collisions don't happen here. And that's easy to understand. It's easy. I get it why people think that. And it's because of the reality that carcasses do not last long. Um, and that's because birds, herring gulls, corvids, raccoons, rats, when there is glass that's lethal, they know to find it because it's a free food source. So we found through carcass recovery studies, basically leaving dead birds out, that birds that hit the ground in New York City, if it's on a city street, we only find about 34% of them by the next morning, or later in that morning. Birds don't last long on city streets. The same is true out in suburban or rural areas. Birds just don't last long. The other part of this, our carcasses are incredibly hard to find. For example, you've all been looking at carcasses this whole time. You probably didn't notice it. These are two examples of what birds look like when they're actually collided and dead on the street. If you're not a birder, if you're not looking for this, you overlook it. You do not see these birds because birds are really good at being camouflaged. This just looks like a leaf. That's an injured warbler. And it's part of the reason why people are blind to this issue. The other part of this is that most birds, when they hit glass, only about 10% of birds that hit glass fall dead down beneath it. Most birds hit glass, are stunned for a moment, and then fly off. Our research shows that most of them die later on. So that's why people don't understand that collisions, or they think that collisions don't happen here. That's a common misconception. Another misconception, unfortunately, comes from this experience that a bird hit my window, but it flew away flying. And I suspect that most people have had this experience at some point in their life where they hear a bird hit glass, they see it, and it flies away. And you have that hope that it survived. And I do hope that, there is still hope that those birds are okay, especially if it's a glancing blow or temporary. But our research at rehabilitation centers, their outcomes of birds show that most birds die after hitting glass. 60% of stunned birds later die. And what's scary about this is that it's usually slowly lethal. So most of the birds that went to rehab, it took at least a day to die. And that's, you have they have adrenaline pumping, they are suffering from their conditions. That's the reality of collisions. When a bird hits gas, most likely it's going to fly off and die somewhere else. That's another common misconception to work on. This is one that we've already talked about, but collisions are a city problem. Most people think of collisions, they think of skyscrapers and cities. Most collisions don't happen in cities, and most collisions that do happen aren't happening on the top of skyscrapers. They're happening in the bottom 75 feet of a building. Those areas that birds are moving around during migration, trying to navigate a new space, find vegetation or a place to rest, it's that time that they collide with glass. And that's usually at about tree height level, about 75 feet in the area just above it. So it's the tree canopy and the vegetation around it where you could really focus on reducing collisions. Finally, this is something that is probably little bit more detailed for people that do know about collisions, but this is an argument that does come up, is that it's a light problem or it's a glass problem. And there are two groups that will often say that, like, there's one solution here. But collisions happen because of light and glass. So these collisions do happen for multiple reasons, and you really need to address both to reduce collisions sufficiently. And then finally, windows are often thought of as being bird safe if there is something like this. Like, you've probably seen these bird decals on windows. We'll see them pretty regularly in different areas. Unfortunately, those don't work. They work at reducing collisions at that place where there is a bird silhouette. Birds will fly around it, and because of their ability to navigate through tight spaces, if the spacing is basically not 2 inches by 2 inches, they're going to collide. That's why a design like this at that ferry terminal is so important, because it stops birds from trying to navigate through that open space. And then finally, there's a common misconception that conservation problems are too large to do anything meaningful. That this is a big issue that it's going to be really hard. There's overwhelming issues in the world right now, and it can be hard to decide to act. But what's nice about bird collisions, and what gives me so much hope about collisions, is that this is a really simple solution. Turn off your lights and put a pattern on your glass. Even if it's not a sticker, go out and use a marker or acrylic paint and draw a pattern on your glass. That action alone can save over 1 billion birds a year. This is completely within our reach. This is something that we can achieve and protect many birds. So this is the view I started with. This is a herring gull colony on top of Javits Center, where bird safe glass was installed and has become habitat. And if this is possible in New York City, as the city is being built up around it with all of this glass, it is really possible anywhere. And you can absolutely think of New York City Bird Alliance as a resource as you embark on this and trying to build out more bird safe design in South Florida. And we are happy to help. And together we can certainly save the birds that we share and make a large difference. So with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer questions now. I can also be reached here. This is my email if anybody would like to reach out and discuss further. So jump into questions. Thank you.
Dustin, thank you. That was brilliant. That was so inspiring, informative, sad also to learn the degree of the problem, but also inspiring to learn that there are solutions, and the solutions can actually save most of those birds that are dying. So it's you're really saying it's really kind of up to us to do that, and I really appreciate that. So we have a bunch of questions in the chat. Uh, we lose Scott Thoreau said we lose 1 billion birds per year from glass light, but your other graphic says we've lost 2.9 billion birds since 1970. Would you help us clarify the magnitude of birds lost annually versus over the past 55 years? Thanks.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and it's part of the confusion around this issue. So there are birds that are that's looking at general overall bird population. So how many birds there are in the entire population over time. So individually, those birds are being killed by glass, which is partially happening back then. But you can see that this issue, as well as many others, is causing bird populations to not recover. So it's that recovery that's happening, that's being lost over time of this entire population over essentially the breeding population. So individuals that are flying up in spring might collide with glass and die. Other individuals are going to survive and make it and reproduce. But that over time, that has a toll. So that's really the difference between the total number of birds that are active out in the population versus the the mortality from glass, and then the lack of reproduction to refill that breeding population, if that makes sense.
Kind of a follow-up to that great question by Scott. I know that most young passerines, first-year birds die within the first year, and so I'm wondering if that's also the case for bird window collisions. Are you finding there are more young birds than mature birds that are striking the glass?
So that's one of the unfortunate realities of glass, is that you would expect there to be more young birds. And for the number of young birds versus how many birds overall are migrating in fall, it doesn't align exactly, right? So there are certainly a lot of young birds that collide with glass, but it's not just a young bird issue. Adult and healthy birds collide with glass. Similarly with that other study, We were kind of hoping to find that birds, when they were brought to rehab, had more were sick or didn't have fat stores or were pushed into some threatened state. But bird collisions are primarily happening with healthy adult birds, or healthy young birds. There's no sign that it's one way or the other. But that said, the fall is when the majority of collisions do happen. Especially in New York City, we see about three-quarters of our collisions happening in fall, partially because of young birds and then just the sheer number of birds moving through, but also because migration takes a lot longer. There's more vegetation around. Birds aren't in that mad rush to get through as they are in spring.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. By the way, Autumn Coyote, our Director of Education and Outreach, worked for New York City Bird Alliance, formerly New York City Audubon, back in the teens, and actually at the same time that Dustin was there. And she's going to join the this portion of our Q&A as well. So, Autumn, if you'd like to share, if you'd like to share your video and join us, that would be great. Hi. So if you have any thoughts or questions or follow-ups as well for Dustin, please chime in. So a question by Alyssa Kramer Parrott. Does National Audubon try to work with International Dark Skies Organization? I know you're having a Dark Skies Week in mid-April and asking people to participate. This would be so beneficial for birds, wildlife, and humans.
So I can't speak to exactly what National Audubon is doing for collisions. It is something that I think they're considering. But collisions are definitely having a moment. So collisions, and by that I mean people are really paying attention more recently, partially because people birding is very in right now, but also people are becoming more and more aware of how big this threat is. And there's a great movement through that was started by Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, to address this. That's pulling in organizations from across the country, smaller nonprofits, Cornell, ABC. All these organizations are getting together to address this and connect Dark Skies International with this issue and bringing in that guide, because I part of the issue here, we talked about bird collisions as a result of artificial light at night, but night sky is habitat, and bright lights at night are not just affecting birds; it's affecting insects, vegetation, bats, all the other things that use the night sky or use that need darkness, and it is a pretty big issue.
By the way, I'm so glad that you used the term that the night sky is habitat. We all look up, and we look up at night at the stars, but it's hard to think of it as habitat. We usually think of habitat as being something on the ground and not in the sky. And that's a wonderful way to think about it in terms, particularly when we're trying to argue about the reason why it's important to have dark skies, because it actually is habitat, and that's so wonderful that you brought that up. So does color of light matter? Asks Kevin Baker.
There's mixed data on it, so it does seem to make a bit of a difference, but there's no clear answer. Not yet, at least. What does make the biggest difference, though, is not necessarily the color of light, but the intensity and consistency of it. So that's why flashing lights on like a communication tower are far better than just a steady glowing light. A steady glowing light will pull birds in. A flashing light might kind of pull them in, but they're not going to collide with it immediately. They're gonna reduce those collisions. That's kind of like what we observe at the tribute and light, where you have that steady glow, birds build up, we shut the lights out, they snap out of it, and they keep moving on. So if there's one thing that can change, it's reducing the intense how long those lights are on.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's good to know too. And by the way, for everybody, I put into the chat some of the types of kind of post glass solutions that exist that you can get for your own home. And so you'll see that in the chat, and I'm sure there are more as well. Dustin, is there a particular site where people can kind of get an overview of all the possible solutions that they can use for their home, as opposed to trying to find each specific one?
Um, uh, I would say check out American Bird Conservancy. That's the one that's coming to mind. They do have a strong focus on individual homes, and I think they have a section in their website that's for home solutions.
Great.
I think the Fish and Wildlife, um, Bird Collision Prevention Alliance, their website might also have some of that information specifically for homes, but I know ABC has had that up for quite some time.
Okay, great. Thank you. And by the way, off the top of your head, do you know, like, kind of what the average cost might be to protect one window? I'm just trying to give people a sense of how much, what the expense is.
Yeah. So uh, I have protected some of my windows for essentially no cost by using acrylic paint. So it's the cost of the
Right,
paint.
right. I read that.
Paint the
Yeah.
pattern on it. I do it with my 6-year-old daughter. It gets her involved in it. She loves doing it. Just follow that rule of 2 by 2 spacing. Makes a big difference. But for something more permanent, which I also have on my home, um, you use product like either feather friendly or bird divert or something else or bird servers on an individual window. It's really actually rather cheap. You can get the home products for I think like other under 10 or $15 to do a
Wow.
window. I mean, you apply it. Um, at a larger scale, like if you have a wildlife center that you're thinking about retrofitting, or there's if you're thinking of like a park that you go to that has glassy windows, because that's often a common issue. Those are often high collision sites. That can cost a little bit more because you have to get custom made sheets. Most of the cost though comes from the labor to do that retrofit. So if you can access it and do it yourself, like what you saw in the photo of the guy putting on the film, you can save a lot of money. If you need to do it, for example, in New York City, the rules that the what we base New York City, the estimate that we have in New York City is about $12 to $15 a square foot. And that's if you need to access 5 stories high on a lift. And that can be more expensive, obviously, if you need to shut down a city street and get a permit for that. But that is kind of a large scale retrofit when you start working with large sums of money to retrofit a massive building. It can have go into the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
For the homeowner, again, this is just more questions that may help people decide. Um, should homeowners do every window? Should they focus on windows primarily that might be on the south and north where the migration pattern would be? Should they do windows that maybe are close to feeders? So what windows do you recommend people to do?
Yeah. So there's pretty clear data that feeders are a large driver of collisions at homes. So if you have a feeder, the glass near near that feeder should be made bird safe. It'll make your experience much safer too, because if you have a feeder, you've likely experienced collisions,
Right.
and you can sit there and not worry about a bird flying into glass just by putting a product on the outside and making it visible. It really doesn't interrupt your view. Um, I would I would encourage that uh, sometimes if you're like looking at a window at home at a feeder and you've seen all the birds hit the top portion of the window, so you might be tempted just to the top portion of the window, that you should do the whole window, because what happens is oftentimes birds will fly to that window, see the design that's there, and just go beneath it to try to get past it. So when you're fixing a portion of glass, it's important to do the whole piece of glass so you don't concentrate collisions in one area. The orientation of a window doesn't seem to have much of a bearing on where collision might occur, but focus on areas that you've either heard collisions happening or seen them happen, feeders or areas that are nice near some particularly nice habitat. So like if your property has a nearby house or something, there's not much vegetation there. Maybe not focus on that, focus on the area that's near a spot where birds might use. And then finally, if you have a house that has a natural kind of funnel, like if you have a house that has 2 wings going out of it and you have a front door here and you have vegetation built into it, birds have a really hard time with funnels and courtyards where they go into something and they don't know how to navigate out, and those tend to drive collisions. So those are
Wow.
also sites to focus on.
Okay, great, great. Thank you. And that's great advice to homeowners. I hope you're listening carefully. So Kevin Baker asked, during migration, could strategically place strong lights on timers steer birds around known dangerous areas?
It's an interesting idea, and it hasn't necessarily been tested, and there is quite a bit of risk to that, and also quite a bit of cost to it. So that Tribune light, for example, is specially designed lights that are a they suck about as much energy as Lower Manhattan when you're running. That strength light outside of Manhattan might pull boards toward that. They might head towards that if it was outside of Manhattan, but they're going to get stuck in that. You turn the lights off, they might get drawn to Manhattan. So it hasn't been proven to be a solution anywhere really. Plus, migration can vary quite a bit. So, for example, this year was the worst year on record in New York City for collisions.
Wow.
It was largely due to weather patterns, prevailing weather patterns, birds getting pushed out towards the city from wind, or and low cloud conditions. at the Tribune Light every year that we're out there, I hope for rain or strong winds that are going towards the west because it push birds to the west and away from New York City. And that's really one of the major drivers that is going to be pushing birds around. One of my colleagues, Catherine Chen, has done great work using Project SafeFlight data to look at when collisions are most likely with certain weather conditions. And what you can do with that data, which applies to anywhere, is you can have targeted lights out approaches. So on a day where there's high migration and a low cloud ceiling and winds pushing against the direction of migration, those are the most important days to turn lights out. So if you're going to do any action with light, turn lights out on those days that collisions are most likely going to be bad at night and during the next day, and you'll have the greatest impact.
It's interesting. Thank you. Thank you for that. Does a dark building appear to be a solid structure to birds, like a hill or mountain, causing them to naturally fly around it rather than colliding with it when the lights are out? It seems like light would allow them to see that structure is there, but light causes the opposite as you have presented. Logic would say that if there is a tall building in the flight path, that there would be collisions because they don't see it.
Yeah, it's a good observation. Um, so most birds migrate far above buildings. So they're going to be flying way above the Empire State Building or any other major buildings in cities. They're flying at tens of thousands of feet. So that's not necessarily going to drive those collisions to have a barrier in front of them. But when they're taking off, there is risk. And that's actually where a lot of the risk of like communication towers comes from. And those guy wires that connect to the top of the towers, those are particularly lethal because they do that. It's just a barrier that's present that you can't really see that's there and you collide with
Right.
it. Um, and it's also one of the challenges with understanding bird safe design is that birds see very differently from us. We are looking forward. We have two eyes that allow us for 3D view. If you think what a bird view must be like, where it has a bill in front of it, two eyes on the side of its head, looking out that way for most birds, that's a very different perception of the world than what we have. So it's hard to say exactly how they perceive things, but it's an interesting thing to think about.
Okay, thank you. So by the way, this recording will be on our YouTube Audubon Everglades channel in a couple of days. So if you want to watch it again, you can watch it there in all past recordings, at least most of the past recordings that we have been given permission to put on. How big a problem is windmill for birds? Because we have a certain executive in office who seems to be saying it's the biggest problem.
Yeah, all the data that I've looked at shows that it pales in comparison to windows and glass. Not even close. Like they're not even on the same scale. It doesn't mean that windmills shouldn't be sited properly. You don't want to put them in flyways. You don't want to put
Right.
them with bright lights next to them. Um, but it's nowhere near the billions of birds that are dying from collisions with glass.
Can roadkill bird mortality be reported on dbird.org?
Yeah, great question. We do offer other ways to report dead birds. You could probably put a note in there. I don't know if we put it in roadkill, but there are other options so you can drop down. It's not just for bird window collisions.
Okay. So you can put other mortality that we witness on there as well. And often
Absolutely.
it's it's true as you stated that sometimes we don't really hear the collision or see the collision, but we find a dead bird in our yard and we think, oh, it died of natural death or some other cause. But the chances are it was probably a collision and it probably flew somewhere else, and that's where it died.
Yeah.
So Ann Wiley asked, there is a horrific bird killing building near me, killer building. I have posted info on their door, spoken to tenants and emailed who I thought was the building owner. What can I do?
Yeah. Um, so that's a good question. I would keep up with it. So see if you can get in contact with anybody there. The important thing though, when you do get that first conversation, right, you do need to reach somebody in the building, whether it's a tenant or the person that manages the building or the owner of the building. When you have that first meeting, share a little bit of information, but really listen. So we do a lot of this in New York City, and it's our impulse, I think, as most people in this room, like we really care about birds and biodiversity, but not everybody does. And it's important to listen to see what they might care about, but then make that connection and say, oh, okay, you're interested in sustainability, or interested in having a building that people want to live in. Um, I can help you do that by reducing bird collisions. This will be a great way to achieve your goals of whatever those goals might be and find that common ground to work together. If you need, it depends on what this building looks like, but most of our products are designed for major large buildings that are either large residential buildings, or where there's companies working. We have some products that you could adopt and give to them, because oftentimes they're just afraid of cost or bird safe design, and we can help get past that. But keep it up. Also, any bird killing buildings you see there, report them on dBird. And then when you finally do get that meeting, you can zoom in and show like, hey, look how many birds have been
Oh,
reported
great,
here.
great idea. Great idea. By the way, Ann Wiley also says, my very large north window reflecting vegetation has a copium bird savers on it that I made for $10 in one afternoon. Stopped all strikes, spacing 3 by 3/4 inches between the copium savers. And I think that this is the final question, because I did promise to get you out of here, because I know you want to see your daughter before she goes to sleep. When the red-shouldered hawk visits my home, the mourning doves suddenly scatter from my platform feeder, and a few run into the screen around my pool patio. All the doves not caught by the hawk fly off alive. Are the doves being harmed by the screen?
Probably not. Screens are a great solution. So if you have opportunity to install screens in your home, that is probably one of the best solutions for bird safe design that's out there, right? Because it's still functional. It let birds know that there's something there. And what you're probably witnessing when that they panic and they fly into it is they bounce off. It's kind of like a trampoline. So screens work really well. I think they have a threat factor of 1, in
Okay.
terms of like what American Bird Conservancy has tested. But that observation is really interesting, because that's often a driver of collisions. And there are some sites in New York City where American kestrels have started to learn to hunt mourning doves near glassy buildings, because they could drive them towards the glass and stun them temporarily and then
Wow.
pick them off. And it is a moment of the birds, they might otherwise know that there's some barrier there, but their priority is getting away from whatever's trying to eat them. So they do have that moment and they're not thinking clearly, and they collide.
Wow. Autumn, do you have anything you want to add?
No, you guys asked all the questions. You asked all the great questions.
Okay. Well, thank you, Autumn. Thank you for joining in.
Don't thank me.
Okay. No, thank you, Autumn. Dustin, I want to let you go. Thank you so much. It was a great presentation. I cannot thank you enough for joining us this evening and taking the time to do that. I think what the education that you provided is priceless, and hopefully, just by what you've told us, we will help save some of these birds from crashing into our windows. Thank you so much, Dustin.
Thank you so
Have
much
a
for
great
having me,
night,
and thank you all for thinking about
yeah,
bird safe collision, bird safe
and
class.
and enjoy seeing your dog.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. So, so wait. It takes a great team to help bring these virtual presentations, so thank you to all of them. And we can't wait to see you on March 3rd, 2026, when we will be hosting Dr. Mike Webster, Director of Macaulay Library, and Robert G. Engel, Professor of Ornithology in Cornell University's Department of Neurobiology and Behavior, who has played a key role in the development of the Merlin app and the Macaulay Sound Library, as he presents Can Birding Save Birds? I'm sure that's a presentation you're all going to want to hear. Anyway, good night. Thank you for joining us this evening. Enjoy the warmer weather, although there is another cold front coming, but not as bad as this previous one. And see you all next month or at some of our events. Please make a point of attending. We have some great events coming up. Take care, everybody. Have a great night.